The International Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, look at small islands as one regional group. Along with landlocked jurisdictions, they are considered highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change. The IPCC state that there is high agreement and robust evidence to suggest that the biggest risks of climate change that islands will face over the next century include cyclones, rising sea levels, increasing air and sea temperatures, and changing rainfall patterns. Even with continued adaptation measures, it is predicted that there will be increased loss of livelihoods, settlements, infrastructure, ecosystem services, as well as reduced economic stability in islands. Coastal areas face even higher risks. However, it should be remembered that not all small islands have the same risk profiles. Due to differing human and physical attributes, vulnerability can vary between regions and even between islands in the same region. This diagram shows the annual projected median change in surface temperature, precipitation and sea level for 2081 to 2100 compared to between 1986 and 2005 for different regions of small islands. These figures have been modelled by the IPCC using what is known as Representative Concentration Pathway 4.5 for carbon levels. The area of islands with the biggest projected annual increase in temperature is the Mediterranean. The Pacific and Indian Ocean islands are predicted to get more precipitation, while the Caribbean and Mediterranean islands are predicted to get less. Meanwhile, sea level rise projections are similar to general global projections at an increase of either 0.4 to 0.5 or 0.5 to 0.6 metres by 2100. To gain an insight into the extent that an island's population could be affected by sea level rise, the diagram also shows, for selected islands with available data, the percentage of the population living in areas where elevation is below 5 metres. Bermuda is particularly vulnerable in this respect, with over 80% of the population living below 5 metres. Finally, the Island Global Research Vulnerability Score for climate change for each of the 25 islands sampled in the monitors is also depicted. Jersey and Tasmania score 1, indicating high resilience. While at the other end of this scale, a number of the Caribbean and Pacific islands, such as Vanuatu and Jamaica, score 5, indicating high vulnerability. The main aspects considered when vulnerability was analysed included risk to population from extreme weather events, including flooding, risk to inhabited areas from sea level rise, and risk to agricultural output and marine sectors from the effects of climate change. The particular vulnerability of small island developing states, or SIDS, is clear from this diagram. More developed jurisdictions tend to score between 1 and 3, while less developed jurisdictions tend to score 4 or 5. I'm going to identify 3 major reasons for this. The first is that the geographical location of SIDS makes them highly susceptible to extreme weather events, such as cyclones, and globally, with climate change, the intensity of such events is predicted to increase in terms of wind speed and amount of rainfall. Secondly, the topography of SIDS means that most human settlements are clustered in coastal areas, making their populations even more vulnerable to the risks of sea level rise and flooding. Finally, SIDS tend to not have a huge amount of funds to put adaptation and risk reduction strategies into action. For them, climate change is only one challenge to overcome in achieving sustainable development. So while generalisations can be made about SIDS, the IPCC recognises that more local research is still needed to understand the effect of climate change on each individual island. This would help governments and organisations to understand whether the strategies that they're trying to put into place really are locally appropriate. Although more developed islands are not considered as vulnerable as SIDS, climate change still poses a significant risk. Those often cited include flooding from storm surges, drought, damage to coastal defences, coastal erosion, and changes in marine species distribution. It's actually often these islands that have managed to carry out local research into the effects of climate change on them and nearby islands. For example, a report published by the States of Guernsey found that by the 2080s, The frequency of hot summer days in the Channel Islands is expected to increase 4 to 5-fold, with a 70 to 85% reduction in frosts. Days of heavy precipitation are expected to increase by 30 to 50% in winter, but decrease 40 to 50% in summer. Finally, sea level could rise by 0.65 metres, while offshore wave height could increase by 10%. The report went on to describe how a rise in the base sea level means that waves will break closer to the shore, increasing the energy release near to the land, which could in turn lead to more erosion and damage to coastal defences, increasing the risk of flooding with current barrier methods of coastal protection in place. With that background in mind, the Monitor will now go on to look at key climate change related statistics before considering best practice in climate change mitigation and adaptation.